Brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, enemies and whoever else is listening, welcome to episode 9 of the Evening Mood podcast, still in pilot phase. Hopefully this is going to be the official last pilot episode and we'll actually launch this thing soon. Today is April the 17th. We've got some interesting stories to talk about, which we've sort of prepared for. I'm joined by the deplorable Steve Sweeney.
Hello.
And also by Phil Miller.
Evening.
Evening.
It's evening somewhere.
Evening somewhere. Someone listening to this could be listening to the evening. And we're also joined by Kadeem Simmonds. How's it going?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Morning. Why was I called deplorable, Ben?
Because I think that someone called you deplorable recently, didn't they?
Did they?
Weren't you referred to as a deplorable person? I usually
Quite
call you
possibly.
I usually call you the illustrious, and I thought I'd go for the deplorable since some minister in Turkey called you deplorable now.
No, objectionable.
Objectionable.
Objectionable and a threat to national security. Yeah, I'm sure somebody has called me deplorable.
So we haven't done an episode in about 2 weeks. Mainly that's to do with me being lazy, but it's also because you spent some time at a jail in Turkey.
Yeah.
Which we're going to talk about in a full episode some other time. We're going to do an interview, get the scoop about 3 weeks late. As usual, we're going to talk about some stories. The four of us all work for the Morning Star newspaper, but this is not the Morning Star's official podcast. So all the opinions expressed, etc., are our own. So if you've got a problem with that, get in touch with us, not the paper. Or if you love it, get in touch with us. And the paper. Maybe throw the paper some money.
I can say buy the paper.
Yeah, buy the paper, donate to the fighting fund, keep us in the job.
I wouldn't say donate to the fighting fund, just, subscribe to the yearly edition and,
Good bit of campaigning there. Maybe we should... let's move on. So, today we're going to talk about the Notre Dame fire and the money raised to rebuild that. We're also going to talk about Kick It Out, which is asking social media companies to deal with racists. But first, we're going to deal with the story that Phil Miller wrote about in today's paper, which again is April the 17th. And this is about British military police who were photographed this weekend with Bahraini's King's Guard.
Yes, this is a story that came to us from some Bahraini exiles in London at the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy. They came across these photos at the weekend that showed the King of Bahrain, who's a unelected, he's a dictator, for want of a better word, being flanked by lots of British soldiers from the Royal Military Police. And the military police, as well as investigating crimes among British soldiers, they also have a special bodyguarding unit. And they appear to be working with the King of Bahrain's Royal Guard, which is his bodyguard unit. And there's a photo of one of the military police supervising some target practice on a firing range. So we asked the Ministry of Defence to comment on these photographs, but they did not respond to us. But the photographs seem fairly self-explanatory. So it looks like there's definitely some training going on there. And Britain has a very deep relationship with Bahrain. There's a Royal Navy base there. And what this shows is it's just another layer of the closeness of the relationship at every level, including the sort of the King's inner circle protecting him at this level.
There were pictures, weren't there, of some of the military police, or the Red Caps, just helping soldiers shoot, weren't there? Does the King see? It seems that the King has like an all-female bodyguard.
Yeah, there seems to be a sort of female unit within the Royal Guard, and a lot of the military police were women as well. So I don't quite know what the significance of that is, but it is interesting. And maybe the Ministry of Defence will get back to us today, but when we went to press last night, they were
too slow at getting back to them. Fancy that.
Yeah, I know. Shocking.
I mean, it's just another example of Britain propping up deplorable regimes around the world.
Yep, definitely.
As it often does.
Yep, in the Gulf. This Royal Guard unit is overseen by the King's son, Prince Nasser, who is a big supporter of the war in Yemen. So again, it's another sign of Britain's closeness to repression in the Gulf.
Yeah, it's pretty grim, isn't it?
Yeah.
This like I was thinking about this yesterday. And is there a regime in the Middle East aside from Iran that Britain does not support?
I think some, there's, in terms of unelected regimes, there's, I guess, no, not many.
Not really. Well, Syria obviously as well.
But I think they do tend to support the kind of most brutal dictatorships, not just in the Middle East. They support the most brutal dictatorships
Globally.
across the world, whilst opposing any kind of progressive forces, either within those own countries or in countries that have progressive leaders. Take Venezuela is a classic example, as is Turkey, where they refuse to support democratic forces in Turkey that people that are in prison, elected politicians, whilst rolling the red carpet out for Erdogan, and then they're supporting the coup against Maduro, whilst giving support to far right leaders like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. So
Yeah, and specifically in Bahrain, there was a strong left-wing movement, particularly in the 70s, and that was suppressed largely by a former British colonial police officer who'd played a leading role in suppressing the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. So, they almost create the circumstances where the only political forces left in these countries are the most reactionary and the most brutal, because the progressive forces have been wiped out.
And in Bahrain as well, though. I mean, I worked on the story yesterday on Bahrain as well, and the British or Durham Police and the University of Huddersfield are both training the Bahraini police security services.
At every level, there seems to be British involvement. Everyone's trying to cash in somehow on this regime and propping it up.
And this is a regime that yesterday, revoked the citizenship of 138 opposition.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, it's a crime against humanity, ripping people's.
It's a violation.
It's
of
a violation
law.
of human rights, isn't it?
Yeah,
making people stateless is a crime, isn't it? In international law.
Yeah, and they did it. They have these mass trials, and there's 138 yesterday. I think last May there were 115, and these are all kind of political, activists that oppose the government and expose human rights abuses, and their confessions are often extracted by torture. The Durham statement on the Durham Police website says that something along the lines of that the training is training that is offered is to expand British values in the region and is fully compliant with human rights considerations, which is quite astonishing.
Don't even just listen to this. It's not even subtle. It's not like it's in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the night they're doing the training. It's universities and stuff. It's like we can actually see what you're doing. You're not fooling no one. We are watching you do this, and yet the government's just
But they're proud of it.
yeah,
That's the thing.
it's and then say we're saying we can see you do it. Yes, we want you to see us do it because we don't care. We can do this, and you can't stop us.
It does touch on this notion, though, of they were talking about expanding British values into Bahrain and into the region. Now, we could argue, actually, well, they're doing that because British values, or the values the values of the British ruling class, certainly have been the expansion of torture and the killing of and crushing of opposition groups. So, that they are expanding that. That certainly, they're certainly doing that. It depends what they mean by British values, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's I think Bahrain is also a British has lots of British naval bases. I think much like Brunei, sorry.
You say the same country, weren't you?
Yeah, much like Brunei, which has also plenty of British bases, and also another absolute monarchy supported by the British.
Yeah, that's just introduced capital punishment for a whole range of things.
Yeah, if you have sex with someone from the same gender, they'll stone you to death.
Yep. I think also having an affair is also punishable by either death or something fairly horrific.
Fucking hell.
And I think there's lots of British army bases in Brunei. I mean, last week when I was at the Court of Appeal for this campaign against the arms trade, we're trying to stop Britain selling arms to Saudi.
Mhm.
The government were arguing that so there was a city in Yemen that the Saudi military had given out a warning saying we're going to bomb the whole city. And Campaign Against the Arms Trade was saying, that's clearly indicative of a war crime. There's no regard for the civilians. And the government were trying to defend the statement by the Saudi military to say, they didn't actually carry out complete bombing of the city. They just said they were going to. Now, this statement was made by a brigadier in the Saudi military who's one of the few people that's been reprimanded for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So this is the kind of person that the British government were trying to say, we shouldn't be too hard on this chap's statement because he didn't really mean it, which kind of summed it all up to me.
It's so ridiculous because, like you were saying, I'm guessing, Kadeem, you've not heard many of these stories before or paid much attention to them.
No, not at all.
But what's interesting is I think most people don't. But the fact is, our media always highlights things that the official enemies are doing, not what we're actually doing, not the bastards that we support. And it creates this thing in people's mind where so I got into an argument recently with someone about British foreign policy and the things we do abroad. And this person said to me, I think, don't they do this but it's always in, the people's interest. It's always for the greater good. And I didn't have the heart to get into it. And I just said, well, maybe for their greater good, not for ours.
Well, you look at even in Sudan recently, we've seen the toppling of, of the authoritarian dictator, Omar al-Bashir, which, from people power, people have took to the streets and finally deposed him. Although now we're in the position of a military coup, so they're trying to push through the demands and the transfer of power to the people. But he'd been in power since 1989. He came to power in this in a coup, and unsurprisingly, he's wanted for war crimes. In Darfur as well. There were sanctions imposed on him by the US, who lifted them in 2017. It was one of Barack Obama's last things he did when he was just as he left office. Before he left office, he lifted the sanctions because the US has the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, have a large base in Khartoum, the capital. So that was then, human rights were kind of cast aside really for this consideration, and all of a sudden they've kind of rebranded Bashir as this this ally and a force of stability in the region. Obviously, when South Sudan was formed and broke away, and the European Union likewise all of a sudden saw him as an ally, because they struck the Khartoum process. They struck this deal with him, or dealing with a load of others, regional leaders as well. But they saw him as key to this because they would stop the flow of migrants leaving the eastern migratory routes into the European Union. And they put their kind of Donald Trump wall, to try and keep migrants out of the Eurozone, people that they don't want there. So this goes to the notion, smashes through that notion of free movement, that it's free movement for white people.
Yeah, well, I worked on a story last week about a ship called the Alan Kurdi, which was named after a young boy who drowned, and his picture was seen all over the world. A young migrant, I think he was Kurdish and Syrian.
Was the one on the beach?
Yeah, the boy on the beach, the 5-year-old. So the ship is operated by this NGO called CI, and they rescued, I think, 64 people in the Mediterranean off the coast of Syria on April the 3rd. And they were stuck at sea for 10 days, and the European Union, countries in the European Union, Italy and Malta, France, etc., they were bickering over who's going to take them in. And the NGO said, get the people to land, because no one allowed them a safe port, get them to land and then squabble. Yeah. But they were squabbling while they were at sea. So it's a disgrace, the things that we think about the EU and these policies like that they're humanitarian and Britain and all that such. Anyway, got to a bit of a ramble there. Shall we move on to the next story?
Shall we? What is the next story?
The next story is about Notre Dame.
Yes, the cathedral. Everybody will know because it's been, it's had wall-to-wall media saturation, media coverage, that the 850-year-old Notre Dame Cathedral, this iconic Parisian, Parisian building has burnt to the ground. The roof collapsed and the spire collapsed. Everyone would have seen this. No denying that it's tragic. It's very sad when things like this happen. But I think there's been some kind of criticism over the response on a number of levels. One, the wall-to-wall media saturation, which has we had. I mean, I only wrote a small piece in today's paper, really because the response, for example, from the Guardian, the paper of the
Britain's leading liberal voice.
Liberal voice here, kind of set the hair running in an editorial that this might have been something to do with terrorism. And obviously we've seen the terror attacks in Paris, but there's no evidence to suggest this. The cause actually is unknown, and investigations are underway to discover why the fire started. But two things. One was this Guardian editorial, which kind of made the connection. They were talking about a divided Paris, divided city, and we know what the connotations of what that means. And they kind of set this notion that it might be might have been a terrorist terrorist attack. They talk about that Paris has been subjected to some vicious terror attacks, etc., etc. So they set that hair running, and nobody else was talking about it at this time. And in Britain, the liberal newspaper was the one that was pushing that line. And by terrorists, what they really mean is Muslims. That's what they mean. So we should be very clear about that. But then there was this talk: we are all Europeans. Everyone's crying for Notre Dame, and there was also another attempt to link the fire to the Gilets Jaunes movement. Now, of course, that has been raging since November last year. These big protests every weekend, which have been met with police violence, which nobody's talking about. They're trying to talk about the violence of the Gilets Jaunes, but the police have injured, I think, 1,700 protesters. They've been firing these awful kind of projectiles at people. One person's lost an eye, limbs have been damaged. There's serious injuries, and this is the government's response to the anti-government protest there. So they've responded with this kind of violence. But yesterday there was a picture circulating around social media, trying to suggest that somebody there in a yellow vest, a high-vis jacket at the fire, was one of the Gilets Jaunes, one of the yellow vests, and the obvious link there is to try and say that it was this movement that had burnt down the cathedral. Now, it soon transpired, officials told the Liberation newspaper that in fact the person that was photographed in a high-vis vest was a firefighter. But that damage is already done, and this, you have to think, who does that best serve? And there's a sly kind of insinuation that this has been caused by either terrorists or Muslims or Gilets Jaunes or somebody that they perceive as a threat to their to their rule. But it's so there was that. There's been that element to it, but also I think what has jarred a lot of people is this kind of fundraising that has that in the wake of the fire, that France. I mean, the Gilets Jaunes movement are on the streets because France is suffering from this neoliberal austerity program of the Macron government. There's lack of opportunities, particularly for young people. Prices are spiraling, the cost of living is rising, wages aren't. Public services are being slashed, pensions are being cut. So there's these sort of broad attacks from the government on people's living standards in France. Yet all of a sudden, when the Notre Dame Cathedral burns down, this money appears to repair it. Macron comes on almost tearful on television. I'm sure he is upset. I mean, it might be genuine. He might genuinely be upset about it, but underlying that is this notion that, when we need money for something like this, it can be found. We have these millionaires that are, in one fell swoop, just a stroke of the pen, and they found 300 million. I think 600 million in total. So
I think that's what the Independent's find, right?
Yeah. So to kind of follow on from that, me being not my sport yet, Lyon defender Jason Denier said about the 600 million committed by billionaires. He said that a wonderful gesture, but a shame that they don't do the same for the thousands of children dying of famine.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people are kind of saying that, you know, it's a tragedy that this building has, you know, been damaged. But
I don't think there's any disputing that the tragedy, but also you have to look here at Grenfell. Is the thing to look at here? Grenfell, you know, was a tragedy of epic proportions, and it was a tragedy which was one again that was entirely avoidable. Austerity was at the heart of what happened at Grenfell. But these were poor people living in a tower block that burnt to the ground. But where was the money for the people from Grenfell? Still now, still now, there's people that haven't been rehoused. There's all these luxury apartments sitting empty in the Royal Borough of Kensington, where the fire took place, and people are still suffering now. So it seems like that people, especially poor people, working class people, are a secondary consideration. There was no kind of rush. From millionaires digging their hands in their pocket to help them out, or to let them stay in one of their many houses that they have, or anything like this. The response from the state was utterly shameful, and I'm fairly sure I'm correct, but Notre Dame Cathedral is owned by the state, is owned by the French state as well. Macron has come on television with a tearful thing, and he's set up a fund immediately to raise money. So the response from the state to both has been incredibly different, and the response from the rich has been incredibly different as well. So
it's tragic because, we were just talking about the Alan Kurdi ship that was not on the front pages of any newspaper. There's 64 people stuck in the middle of the sea. No one gives a shit. Building burns down. Nobody dies. I mean, it's tragic. The building's it's old. It's a national treasure and blah blah blah. UNESCO World Heritage Site and such. But it's just the priorities are completely screwed.
Everyone, when it was happening, in the aftermath as well, what you're seeing from a lot of people on social media is, pictures of them, they're going, oh, my day's a tragedy, I was there, I'm really upset. It's like, no one gives a shit if you were there, because you are one of billions of people that have passed it. It's more the fact that, as people are, pointing out, it's, in France, around that area alone, there's people who need money, who need help, need money, through no fault of their own, they are going through a really difficult time. Now, if you can find 600 million euros to redo a building, which they say can take about 5 years, that money come from somewhere, and that money could have, housed people, build social housing, and similar to Grenfell, it's still now there's been no accountability. It's bullshit. I saw an interview with someone on RT who was talking about how, there's people who were on the 10th floor of the Grenfell Tower who had to jump out of the building and stuff like that, and they decided to rehouse them in another tower flat on the 21st floor. Are you fucking stupid? These people don't want to be high up and stuff like that. And there's a people who kind of talking about Grenfell for a bit. To people who there's all these houses, all these apartments, all these abandoned buildings just sitting there in London alone, and they can't put people in there for whatever reason, and it's absolute bullshit. And
I think the problem is that most houses in London, most
private
buildings,
owned,
yeah. Well, they're just like investments for people. They're not homes. They're just buildings.
Yeah, but it's to take it back to the power situation. It's just so. It's one of the situations where, when the rich need to find money for something, they will find it in a heartbeat. If the poor need money, we don't have any, money doesn't grow on trees, there's no magic money funds, but there is. And you can make the argument that, the people should be the ones leading the change and stuff like that, but sometimes you kind of need just a starting fund from the people who have 300 million euros sitting in their account ready for fucking fire and stuff like that.
I think I want to come back to this Guardian thing again. Actually, just because I think it's also another important point. This was the actual statement that one of the first statements they put out. The cathedral will rise again in time. This terrible fire is not an event that should be trivialised or banalised. Yet at a moment like this, how foolish it seems to pretend that we are not all Europeans. We stand with France in its hour of heartbreak. We will never, ever turn away. Now, I mean,
The Guardian's obsession with the EU there.
it's almost astonishing. But though, let's remember that in Syria, Palmyra was destroyed by ISIS. Aleppo was destroyed by ISIS. They destroyed cultural sites across across Syria, also in Iraq as well. And I don't remember the newspaper then telling us we're all Syrian, we're all Iraqi, we'll stand with you, we'll never ever turn away. In fact, they were beating the drum for war in those places actually. So I mean, they were kind of backing that, in a kind of way. But I think we really, it's a really kind of dangerous message to be sending out. It's incredibly divisive, and it sets this notion again that I mean, that's a divisive message. It divides between us and them. It's it's very sad that Notre Dame has burnt down, but it's kind of part of this whole systematic destruction of world culture that has happened over centuries. Really, that this has happened. It's a big, it's a big thing, but this is being shoved. This wall-to-wall saturation is, I don't know.
I think, like, to kind of follow up on the Guardian point you just made. Again, I saw a interview on Twitter. Some Americans around the table talking about this, and one of the guys kind of raised the point that it could have been a terror attack, and it's just like, why put that out there? It's like, you put it out there because there will be dumb Americans, dumb people that will be like, yeah, it was a terror attack, and then all of a sudden, again, that narrative that Muslims are all bad, and it's like, it's you don't even need that to be true, but you need to put it out there into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Because enough people will jump on it, and then all of a sudden, when the shoe comes out and you find out it was just a mistake, maybe someone left a cigarette burner, blah blah. No matter what the actual truth is, there's now a section of people out there in the world who are always going to believe that this was a terror attack.
Exactly.
Be it via terrorists from not just Islam, any kind of terrorist, be it the Yellow Vest movement. There are people going to believe that this was done deliberately by people trying to end
Christendom.
Yeah, just
as they say.
Yeah.
But that's the connotations, isn't it, of what they're of what they're saying. But maybe now after we've seen what's happened in Notre Dame, maybe now that people that were shedding tears over what happened there will understand actually how other people feel in places like Syria and Iraq when their cultural sites are destroyed by not just ISIS. Actually, ISIS obviously deliberately targeted some of these cultural sites, but also from Western imperialism, Western bombs that have blown these kind of things up. So I think we need to be aware of that, and if it perhaps sort of raises that as well, then we'll see.
That would be good. Well, let's move on to the last story. Kadeem, tell us about Kick It Out and racism on social media.
So, as people are aware, racism in football is just getting worse and worse and worse. But Kick It Out, while calling for football teams and football clubs, to get their house in order, to rid the club of the racist fans and stuff like that. They've now turned their attention to social media. Again, just last night, so this would have been Tuesday night, Manchester United lost to Paris Saint-Germain. Lost to Barcelona, sorry. They beat Paris Saint-Germain. Man United lost to Barcelona. Ashley Young had a bad game. It happened. But Twitter after was just full of people calling him the N-word. Just outright racist abuse. And Kick It Out released a statement this morning saying, what is Twitter and social media doing about this? Because it shouldn't be too difficult if you send out a racist tweet for them to go, that's racist, we're gonna take you off social media. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it's not just racism in football, it's the rise of the far right and them using social media to get their message across, basically. And it's, again, social media are doing nothing to stop it, to stem it. It's the fact that you can get an account and just hurl not just racist abuse, you can threaten to kill people. Yeah, you can threaten to rape someone, and Twitter's just like, yeah, it doesn't matter. And you're just there going, what? This is absolutely. I can't remember the UKIP person who was it threatened to rape someone. No. What did it?
Yeah, it's someone in the UKIP party. I can't remember his name, but he's a YouTube personality as well.
Yeah, are basically raising the issue that social media needs to be doing more to clean up their house. And it's not just doing race, like I said, not just doing racism, but some of the ideology that the far right, that terrorists are using via social media, and there's no real urge to clean up.
Well, can I ask a question about this? So people were using the N-word on social media.
Yeah.
Were any of those accounts identifiable? Like linked to, I know because I get some of this stuff sent to me from fake accounts or whatever. But surely this becomes a police matter as well. If they're making these kind of abusive statements on Twitter, that's the police should be doing something, surely.
Well, yeah, they should. And again, they aren't. It's no one cares. No one cares that someone's being racially abused. No one cares if it's.
The police actually arrested somebody in Cambridge, or went and spoke to somebody in Cambridge because a member of the Green Party, this is a few years ago now, because they'd made a comment that a UKIP candidate in the election didn't like, which suggested that they might be racist.
Yeah. So I'm looking at some of the tweets now. One of the people clearly has what looks like his name on there. So you can easily find that person and delete his Twitter account. It shouldn't be too difficult. And what I find interesting is that some of these people are hiding behind a picture of a famous footballer or something else, and the name is nothing. You can't link that specific account back to someone, so it'd be very difficult to press charges. But I think kick it out, just calling for not even pressing charges at this point. Just get them off Twitter. Literally, just delete the account. And if they want to make another one, then delete that one. Every single time these accounts, appear and they start abusing someone, be it racist abuse, be it death threats, just delete the account. It shouldn't be that difficult.
Seems like there's two issues in this story, really. There's the social media, as we're talking about, and being used and abused by the far right to use racist language and stuff. But also, as someone who vaguely follows sport and the emergency sport deputy editor for the Star, it seems to me like recently, in the last couple of months, that racism is kind of gotten out of control in football.
Yeah.
And every week there's a story about a player being racially abused. Now, I don't know, is that? Do you think that's a sign of racism on the rise, or is it we're highlighting it more now? What do you think?
It's funny. I was at a Kick It Out event on Monday, and I was chatting to one of a good friend of mine, George, who works for Kick It Out. And I was kind of saying, over the last few weeks, I've spoken to you more than I have over the last few years, because I'm constantly messaging him saying, "Have you seen this? I'll Kick It Out releasing a statement." And I think, on the one hand, I do think it is a case of that's now being highlighted more. I think previously, a player would be racially abused on social media and they would just ignore it. They wouldn't even highlight it. It didn't matter. Now I think they're now just going, no, this is no longer acceptable. I'm going to start screenshotting these and putting it out there. And one phrase about social media I would never forget, and this is really weird. It was on a wrestling podcast, a wrestler called CM Punk, talking about social media, and he said that if you kind of equate it to, if you live in a house and your kitchen window's open and there's someone just hurling abuse you through your kitchen window, you're going to tell them to shut the fuck up, close the window, and boot off your premises. Twitter is basically that. It's your kitchen window's open, people just hurling abuse at you, And before, people would just, keep doing what they're doing, ignore it. Now people go, you know what? No, this is actually unacceptable, and they're now closing the window and reporting that person who's heard the abuse. So yeah, I do think it is a case of, while it's always been there, it's now been highlighted. People are saying enough is enough.
Exactly.
But in the past, I would have just ignored this racist abuse and got on in my life. But I don't do it no more. I now can report you. The problem is that you're reporting them, and the police, social media are just going, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Freedom of speech, fuck you, and all that kind of stuff. So that's where it needs to change. That's where people need to be held accountable for their actions, basically.
I think there seems to be. I'm not that active really on social media, but I hear. This is hearsay, I suppose, but you hear people on the left run left-wing accounts and stuff saying that their accounts are being removed, or we see Russian RT and Sputnik and such. They're being targeted by social media for spreading fake news or whatever. But you get these right-wing accounts that appear to be getting away with a lot of this stuff, and they're quite good at hiding race. Well, they were. I think people are more caught onto it now. But things like Britain First, and UKIP and such, they can post things in a way that looks like they're not being. We're not being racist. We're just proud of our country.
Yeah.
But behind that is a whole load of racism.
Like I said, I know we're kind of running short on time. The reason I want to raise it is to kind of link it back to politics and stuff like that. And like you said, you're getting left-wing accounts who aren't offending no one. They're getting their account shut down, suspended for 30 days. Whereas, Katie Hopkins is still on Twitter, just saying some of the most racist stuff. And Twitter's just like, she can say what she wants because she's not, because it's her right. It's but it's really not. Obviously, freedom of speech, you can kind of say what you want to a certain degree. You can hold whatever beliefs you want. The moment you start abusing someone, that's not freedom of speech. That's you being an absolute cunt, and it needs to stop. I wasn't going to say that.
We can say it. We swear at this podcast.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech.
yeah. I just want to know your thoughts on, from a political aspect, I guess, and how social media just is allowing the far right to do what the fuck they want.
I had this really interesting lecture at university, and I can't remember his name, but he did say this thing that's always stuck with me. And he said that no one actually believes in absolute free speech. And he said, the reason for that is, people don't always say exactly what's on their mind. Because quite often you have a thought in your head and I'm not going to say that. Fucking hell, why you shot yourself from your own thoughts. And so he was talking about no one actually wants this. So people who would say, I'm a free speech absolutist, I don't think they actually mean it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between freedom of speech and giving people a platform to air their toxic and poisonous views. That's
Steve.
It's every day, dude. Seriously. So it's 11:30. Why do you have an alarm at 11:30?
Because we probably need to get back upstairs.
Yeah, I have to do something at 11:30.
Carry on.
Fucking weirdo.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing between free speech and giving people a platform to air their toxic views. And there's always this debate around. For example, the Cambridge University and Oxford University, they're kind of debating societies. These archaic institutions often invite provocative speakers. Like Cambridge have invited in the past, because we had a huge protest and blocked him inside, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the French fascist, and he was espousing these kind of horrendous far right, racist, Holocaust-denying views. And we live in a society where those views are absolutely toxic, and quite rightly so. They were arguing this thing about freedom of speech. Now, there's a very big... And that was the argument then was, well, yes, he's got the freedom of speech to say it, but we don't have to provide him a public platform in which to air his views. And this is the same with the BBC when they invite...
Climate change deniers or...
Climate change deniers, yes, but I mean people like Nick Griffin they had, the former leader of the BNP, on Question Time, and
Nigel Farage, who's on there every single fucking week.
Nigel Farage, who gets his disproportionate airtime, and of course they have the right to air their views, under freedom of speech, but there's no obligation, certainly not for a state broadcaster, to give them a public platform to do so. They shouldn't be doing that kind of thing, quite frankly, because because of the abhorrent nature of what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I think the similar principles should apply to across social media, and if people are saying things that are racist, they need to be taken to task for it quite clearly.
There's nothing wrong. Ashley Young was awful last night. There's nothing wrong with going on social media and say, Ashley Young, you're a shit player, please leave my club.
A cheat and a diver.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, if that's completely fine. The moment you bring his race into it, that's the line. Like, you don't need to do that, and that's not just about black players. It's Asian players. It's even white players. Like, you can race abuse a white person. Let's be honest. You can call Andy Carroll injury-prone, complete arsehole.
Well, Andy Carroll actually was subjected to quite a lot of racial abuse because he was called a pikey.
Yeah, but this
is a big thing. Show Racism and Red Card did some campaign work around that actually as well.
And which is why I rate it, because there were people like, well, white people getting racial abuse. It's like, let's calm the fuck down a bit. Like, let's kind of look at it as, to say, at the moment, the issue is black players getting racial abuse, but I don't want to ignore the fact that I'm sure there are, white players who do get some kind of racist abuse because, like you raised, Andy Carroll has had it in the past, and there are others who will get it. It's it's all relative, I guess.
And there's a different, like, this country has a history of systemic racist abuse to people all over the world. So there's a difference.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on this free speech stuff, Phil?
I'm looking at it more like through this issue of the rise of the far right. Because I think at the moment this constant demand for a second referendum is actually fueling the far right more than anything else, even though it's liberals who are leading it and saying, oh, Brexit is terrible because it's causing a rise in racism. I think it's actually this sort of denial of democracy. Like, people who voted to leave quite legitimately will feel disenfranchised.
Yeah.
And that's just going to fuel the underlying racism that's there. So I think that's perhaps the broader context of why we're seeing this rise of it coming out on social media as well. There were people saying on Sky News this morning that having a second referendum is more democracy, so why are people complaining? But a vote has to be meaningful, and if you vote for something and you win and then you're not given it, that's not more democracy. That's the opposite. Of democracy.
Yeah, exactly. Complete opposite.
That's like
amazing.
That's the kind of thing that you will see in Turkey. You have a vote, someone wins, like, actually we don't like that, we're now going to change it, and it's like, well, no, like, it doesn't work like that. You might not like the way the vote has ended, but you have to respect that decision. You have to respect the fact that people voted that way, and so you Erdogan, get the fuck out of our country. So there you go, Steve.
That's a whole other story about the issue of democracy and even free speech and free press and free and social media inside Turkey. I mean, that's something completely incredible, because
that's a whole podcast.
The whole podcast on it.
I am tuning in for that one.
So I think we should wrap this up. Normally we do. I don't know. What do you think? We normally do a dumb question at the end. I'm not sure if we should cut this or not. If we should keep this
I think
in.
we should keep it.
Think a bit of levity is good.
Yeah, it's
nice.
Yeah, it's after 45 minutes of absolute horrible news. Have something fun.
All right then. I've got a silly question.
Yeah.
It's not that silly, but I think we could probably have a bit of debate around it.
I think the best debate, or the only debate we can have, is who's going to sit on the Iron Throne at the end of Game of Thrones.
No, don't talk about Game of Thrones.
I've never watched an episode.
I have. I watched the first two series recently, and
So here's my question. No one can talk about the Iron Throne apart from you. My question is ultimate breakfast.
Oh, mine's easy.
Go on then.
Mine's obviously Turkish Kurdish breakfast.
Oh, fuck's sake.
Yeah. It's the best. It's the best. It's easily the best.
People listening to this now don't know that you're wearing a Kurdish scarf around your neck.
I forgot.
We're in quite a warm room, so I'm not quite sure why you got it on. I just think you you love it too much.
I'm expressing my solidarity.
Expressing each other. Well, I reckon better than a Kurdish breakfast. Did you say Turkish or Kurdish? I'm not
You
sure
said
what
both.
I said Turkish Kurdish breakfast.
Turkish Kurdish breakfast.
What is a Turkish Kurdish breakfast?
Depends which part of the country.
Oh, fuck,
you're in.
dude, what?
Do you really want to ask these questions? Because this
No.
could go on a very long time. Basically, it lasts for ages, and there's so much food. You have about, you go to if you sit down and have a Turkish breakfast or breakfast in Turkey, Turkish or Kurdish, you can sit down and you'll see people going up to these self-service kind of things and filling up, and they'll sit there with about 5 plates in front of them. And
But what's
there'll be all
actually on the
sort-
plates?
It depends it depends, but there'll be like olives, cheese, cucumber, tomatoes, bread, menemen.
People can't see my face right now. I'm just disgusted. Like I haven't
I think
heard.
it sounds pretty good for breakfast. That's
Are
all
you
right.
on? Are you on crack? Listen,
Yeah.
listen. Breakfast. If
Tea.
listen, just no. Like bacon, eggs, sausages,
Cheese.
beans, hash browns, toast,
See, I would go for that, but get rid of give me the veggie sausages
and I'm
and
fine
hash
with that.
browns. Did you say hash browns?
Hash browns need to be
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
like 100%. Like Steve, don't tell me that. Growing
I'm
up,
sorry, but that I do like a fried breakfast. I'm a big fan of a fried breakfast, but it's nowhere near a Turkish Kurdish breakfast.
you
Do you know once I went to make a full English breakfast when I lived in Australia, and I went to the local. I was in Sydney, right? So the biggest city.
I'm still disgusted by the way.
in Australia, and I went to buy the ingredients from the big. So I'm in the centre of the biggest city in Australia, and I went to the biggest supermarket. It's called Coles. Other supermarkets.
Coles.
Hey.
Coles.
Yeah, not spelt your way.
Oh. Nobody
Um,
spells it my way.
But I went in there and I went to get the ingredients, and you couldn't find a proper sausage. There was, all these kind of different kind of spicy sausages. But the best bit was when I went up to the deli counter and I said, "Can I have?" I said, "Have you got?"
Go
have you,
piss.
I said, "Have you got?"
just go piss. It's fine.
I said, I went to try and get some black pudding, and I said behind the counter, I said,
That's disgusting,
I said, "Have you got black pudding?" And she looked at me
Cheers,
surprised.
Phil. Phil's about
She
to
said-
leave while Steve's in the middle of this story. See you, Phil. Cheers.
She says to me, "Oh, I have to go and get my manager." So she goes off. The manager comes back and he says, "I'm sorry, mate, we don't have any black pudding, but we've got some Black Forest gatto."
Oh.
Yeah. I was like, "You're not sure that will really go with the beans,
Yeah.
and the tomatoes and everything." But no, they didn't really understand. I don't think full English breakfast. So I do like it, but
You didn't say what yours was, Ben. You kind of just piggyback off mine and that.
Well, I used to be cereal all the way. I used to love cereal. I used to love chocolate kiddie cereal up until about 2 years ago, and I still do love it. And I would eat it every single day if I wasn't getting old, and if I exercised more, maybe I could get away with it. But now I'm trying to broaden my breakfast horizon. I'm trying to be more healthy.
Fuck your palate.
I
Like
feel like I should for breakfast. I should have just loads of fruit. But
No.
what I really want is eggs, vegetarian sausages, a mountain of hash browns, beans, shitloads of brown sauce, and a bit of vinegar.
brown sauce. Brown sauce is
yeah, that to me, if the ultimate breakfast is the what kind of thing that's like, you know what? I have an hour before I need to go anywhere. I'm going to eat what I want. No one's gonna go, "Oh, let me have loads of fruit." No, fuck that. Like, who's doing that? No.
Should all be eating more fruit.
Fuck fruit for breakfast though.
I'd rather not.
Right.
You get arrested for that. Actually, the other thing in Australia was when I asked for brown sauce, and guess what I was presented with then? Instead of brown sauce, they didn't have brown sauce.
Some kind of ketchup.
Barbecue sauce.
Fuck's sake.
End it on that.
Disgusting.
End it on that. Although barbecue sauce is nice, depending on what it is though.
Not enough-
I'm just
not-
gonna add pointlessly to that story. I went to a chippy on the south coast of this stupid country, and I got chips and I asked for gravy,
Yeah.
and the woman looked at me like I was the weirdest person ever, and then she brought it over in a separate styrofoam cup.
Oh no.
I was like, "What are you doing?" I poured it all over the chips, and it was the wateriest shit I've ever had.
Fuck that.
Fucking Southerners. Right. We're going to finish here. If you are if you like this podcast, then I don't know, share it or something. And
Buy the Morning Star newspaper.
Buy the Morning Star newspaper. Keep us in a job, please.
Even though this is separate to the Morning Star newspaper, I still buy the Morning Star newspaper.
Yeah, just buy it anyway. Steve, if people want to follow you or hurl abuse at you on Twitter, how can they do it?
At
Star
Sweeney,
Trekkie.
at Sweeney Steve, SWEENEYSTEVE.
How about you, Kadeem?
At Kadeem Simmonds, KADEEM, M for mother, and SIMMONDS.
Phil has just dropped out for a
Personal
piss.
reasons.
Maybe I should have said we then.
I said personal reasons.
Don't say either. He's had to leave the room.
Let me say that
He's
again.
had to leave.
Phil has had to leave the room. If you want to follow him on Twitter, he's at PMillerInfo. And if you want to follow me, I am at Colsey. That's COWLESZ. I think next time we do this podcast, we might be able to do it officially under its official name and no longer a pilot. And we may even have some music going. Maybe. The thing is to under-promise and over-deliver, and I usually do the opposite. So on that bombshell... Oh, that makes me sound like Jeremy Clarkson.
Yeah.
On that notice, we'll see you later. Cheers.
Bye.
Yeah, so...